I'm Jon Lentz, United States Managing Editor, and this is Last Look. Today we're talking about one of our two cover stories, a look at Bill de Blasio, the leading candidate in the Democratic field for mayor of New York City. I'm joined by the author of the story, editor Morgan Pehme. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, John.
So where did you get the idea for this story?
Well, we've heard a lot about Bill de Blasio making class warfare one of the tenets of his campaign. And so we wanted to explore whether Bill de Blasio would really be bad for business in New York City. Obviously, business is one of our lifebloods. And so that was kind of the thrust of the article. And
what did you find out in reporting this piece?
Well, it's interesting that those who know Bill de Blasio in the business community actually feel very comfortable with his mayoralty. We spoke with Kathy Wild from the Partnership for New York City, Carlos Azur from the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, and we found that consistently Bill de Blasio has actually been a friend to the real estate industry, a friend to the business industry, and so they don't have any apprehensions about him getting into office, which kind of runs counter to his campaign message.
And then by contrast, you talked to some people in his district that had another perspective on him.
Yeah, well, Bill de Blasio represented Park Slope and Carroll Gardens in Brooklyn, some of the most liberal areas in the city. And what's interesting is that the progressive activists who were very active in his area did not think of Bill de Blasio really as a progressive. They thought of him as a person who had kind of sold out on occasion to real estate interests. He had supported Atlantic Yards, he had opposed the Superfund status of the Gowanus Canal. And so, you know, they feel that he has reinvented himself for the sake of this campaign and has, you know, gone left when he actually is much more moderate.
Right. I think one local referred to him as a faux aggressive.
Yes, that was a term that, you know, the former head of the Central Brooklyn Independent Democrats Club said that she really favored. And, you know, it's striking. I am a Brooklynite, and I knew that when Bill de Blasio represented his district that he was very much thought of as not a progressive voice, and so it's been interesting to see how he has emerged. And in a lot of ways, you know, what I wrote was that this was a function of John Liu's campaign imploding under the weight of the straw donor scandal. That presented a great opening on the left, and which Bill de Blasio took advantage of.
And you also tie in Anthony Weiner in this timeline. How did that impact de Blasio's campaign, you think?
Well, before Anthony Weiner got involved in the race, there wasn't a lot of electricity around the mayoral contest. When he got involved, a lot of people who would never have paid attention to politics otherwise started, you know, getting honed in on the race. Then, after he had the second flare-up of his scandal and he got knocked out of the box, there are a lot of voters who were suddenly energized, who found themselves in want of a candidate. And those were the voters who we found have gravitated towards Bill de Blasio. So, you know, twice in the course of this contest, we've seen Bill de Blasio fill a void.
And it seems to have been effective for him. I think there's a poll out today where he's at 36%. Other polls have showed him at similar levels of support going into primary day tomorrow.
Yeah, and you know, it's kind of interesting because we have seen both, you know, the Democratic electorate is a lot more moderate than it's being portrayed. And, you know, we've seen so many these voters kind of gravitate toward him because they haven't found another candidate that really connects with them. But to a certain degree, it's under not a false premise, but it's, you know, they say that you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. I mean, we've seen a great deal of poetry from the de Blasio campaign that has been very alluring for people. This idea of income inequality is very much at the vanguard of people's thinking in the city, and he's been able to tap into that. He's been the right messenger for the right time. And so, you know, we've seen that, you know, he's peaked at the right moment, and I'm not certain that he's going to be able to reach that 40% threshold to avoid a runoff. But even in the head-to-head and the runoffs we've seen in the polls, that he's in very good standing.
And you also touch on the two other candidates in second and third in the Democratic primary, Quinn and Bill Thompson, and how they've reacted or haven't reacted to de Blasio. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, with kind of John Liu and Anthony Weiner's dissent, Christine Quinn wasn't able to capitalize upon that because she's so tied together with Bloomberg, so tied together with the extension of term limits, that people who see themselves as dyed-in-the-wool progressives, that was a non-starter for them. And Bill Thompson, you know, just as we've seen in the past, though on paper, he has a lot going for him. He's not an electrifying candidate. He's not a person. He didn't have the scent of newness that is necessary to kind of pull people into his camp. And so, Bill de Blasio was able to capitalize in areas that they weren't, Quinn and Thompson weren't equipped to do so.
So in your story, you also touch on a parallel drawn between de Blasio and Quinn on one hand, and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in the 2008 presidential Democratic primary. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, a number of commentators have pointed out that Christine Quinn has run a campaign largely predicated upon this message of experience, like Hillary Clinton did in 2008, whereas Bill de Blasio has really promised the idea of something new, of hope and change. In one of his last ads, it even ends with, "It's time for a change," right? So he's honed in on that message. But I've kind of extrapolated a little bit farther from that a lot of progressives and liberals in this country thought that Barack Obama was almost like it was going to unmask himself once he got into the presidency and prove to be much more liberal than he campaigned. I think a lot of conservatives thought that as well. But in actuality, he came into office and governed very much as the moderate that he promised that he would be on the campaign trail. And that's what I said here in terms of anticipating what a de Blasio mayoralty would be like. I don't foresee him being this raving liberal pushing us far to the left. In actuality, I think some of the progressives who are supporting him right now might become a little disappointed when they see that he's going to govern very much in the center, which is probably best for the city. I mean, generally, the most effective leader does govern from the center, but progressives, might have a rude awakening.
Morgan, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, John.
That's it for Last Look. To check out other Last Look videos, go to our website, cityandstateny.com. You can also read our cover story that Morgan wrote about Bill de Blasio.